Hey guys, welcome back. My name's Evan Morgan, and on today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at my number one tip for decluttering your mix. The mix we're going to be looking at today is Tom Macdonald's new song, No Response. The song has a very dense arrangement and uses a lot of full frequency sounds, so it was a bit of a challenge to get the mix to sound not too cluttered. Let's dive into the session and take a look. Okay, so this is the section we're going to be taking a look at today. Now you might think that my one tip for decluttering your mix is going to involve EQ or it's going to involve sidechaining, but it's actually a workflow tip. And I know that sounds a little unorthodox, but hear me out. So the way I have my session organized is these are all my drums here, starting from the highest priority instrument down to the most auxiliary random instrument. So kick, snare, claps into hi-hats, and then auxiliary crashes and whatnot. Same with instruments. I'm prioritizing instruments based on how significant they are in the song. I'm prioritizing them low to high instruments, and I'm prioritizing them chronologically through the song. So these are my basses here. Then my main instruments, the most significant ones are at the top, and as I move down, they get less significant in their content, and they move from low frequency content to high frequency content. And as we move through the song, and I'm adding in new elements, those are farther and farther down the list. And what this tip does, what this workflow tip does, is it influences your decisions when it comes to EQing and sidechaining and whatever else, because as you're adding in a new element, you're always going back to what are the high priority instruments that I'm adding this to, and what do I have to do to it to add it, to fit it in, to make it sit with what already is there. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So I have my drums, and this is my main bass, 808 main. It sounds like this. Nice big subby bass. I like the way it sounds. Didn't really do much EQing on it. Just a tiny little sidechain with a kick, just so I'm not piling up that low end information. Now, as I add the distorted bass, I'm shaping it to fit to the higher priority instrument above it. So this is the EQ. So I ended up cutting more low end and a little bit of low mid to make it fit with the bass that I deem to be a higher priority instrument. Just before. So you can already hear with that EQ off how the two basses together are already starting to sound a little cluttered and undefined. So as I add that distorted bass to the bass with this EQ, and I start to shave off a little bit of that low end, take out a little low mid, add just a little bit of brightness to bring that fizziness out, we get this. And before, and after. So as we move down, the decisions that I'm making to declutter the mix are all based on the instruments that come above it. So the next one down is this main melody. And this is a sample. If I take the EQ off, this is the EQ I did on it. I'll turn that off. So because a lot of these melodic elements are samples, a lot of them are full frequency, they go right down to the lows, they have a lot of high information. So you'll see a lot of shaving to try and fit it into the other elements that are above it. So this is with the EQ on. And with the basses. Next up, I have this low piano, which sounds like this. And that's with the EQ I did. If I take that off. And you'll hear that low mid information is already going to clutter up the mix. So when I add that to my basses. You almost can't even hear the piano aside from that one note on its own, but when it's playing with the two basses, you can't even hear that it's in there. So clearing up a little bit of that low and adding just a little bit of upper mid there will help it cut through. Now this next element is the element that kind of inspired this whole video, because it's another sample. Let's turn that EQ off. A very full frequency sample. And you can hear that it actually has its own bass note in it. So as I was going through these tracks and organizing my priorities, that's obviously a major sound in this song, but is the low end information in that going to take priority to the 808 or vice versa? And I obviously chose to put the 808 as the main low end instrument. So if I play you those together without any EQ on the melody. You can hear how just those three elements are already a cluttered mess. And just adding the other elements in there would just make it even more so. So I had to get more severe with my EQ cuts to cut out all that low end information so that the 808 is allowed to exist in its own space and the melody is allowed to exist in its own space. Sounds like this. This is before EQ. And after. And the last element in this is these strings, which again have a fair bit of low end information in them. So when added with the other elements, it just starts to clutter things up too much. So all I'm really interested in is more of that high-end sparkle, that the bow on the actual strings. So taking out some of that low end, boosting up at around 7K brings that to life. Now, if I play you all those elements without any EQ on there, you can hear what the before was. And the after. This is with the drums. And this is before an EQ with the drums. And after. So by setting the priority of the instruments in your actual workflow, in your track arrangement, it dictates how you EQ these things to fit with whatever comes above it. So bass elements, major melody instruments, and as you start to add in new elements along the way, you're having to shape them and tailor them to fit the instruments that are that come before them. So I hope you guys find this tip useful in decluttering your own mixes. If you have any other topics you'd like me to look at in future videos, just leave them for me down in the comments. Happy mixing, and I'll see you in the next one.